السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. As to what proceeds, after praising Allah the Most High with love and veneration exclusively for Him, who is separated from His creation in a manner which befits His Majesty, and then requesting Him, the Most High, to send His salah and salam upon His final Prophet and Messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Qurashi, alayhi salatu wassalam. Once again, we meet for our weekly meeting to go through the text which was illustrated by Shaykh al-Ma'sumi al-Khujandi rahimahullah ta'ala, a friend of Shaykh Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani. And as we know that the title of the book is that should a Muslim blindly follow a particular fiqh madhhab. So in our previous meeting, we were discussing some statements from the great researching Hanafi scholars. And from amongst them is a scholar by the name of Kamaluddin ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi, who died in the year 861 after Hijrah. This scholar is an important figure in the Hanafi school of thought, or Hanafism, if you want to call it an ism, a madhhab, fiqh madhhab, which ascribes itself to al-Nu'man ibn Thabit al-Afghani, because Abu Hanifa, his lineage goes back to Afghanistan, and he's not a Persian, that which is Sahih. So he mentions that what is the position of Ibn al-Humam? Ibn al-Humam has also written an explanation of a crucial or an important book of fiqh of the Hanafis, which is taught in all the Darul Ulums, in all the Madaris. In fact, if you don't study this book, they won't even regard you to be a scholar. The book is called Al-Hidayah. Al-Hidayah is an important composition of the Hanafi madhab. And Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi wrote an explanation of this book, or wrote a commentary of this book called Fathul Qadir. He has written other books as well. So the Shaykh rahimahullah, he mentions, he says that Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi, in his book on principles of fiqh, usul al-fiqh, al-Tahrir wa-al-Taqrir. Now, in our previous meeting, I was discussing that the Shaykh rahimahullah, Shaykh al-Ma'sumi al-Khujandi rahimahullah, had a slip of the pen when he ascribed this book to Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi. In reality, we have that Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi, he wrote an explanation of a book on Usul al-Fiqh of the Hanafis. His explanation is known as التحرير في أصول الفقه الجامع بين استلاحي الحنفية والشافعية. التحرير في أصول الفقه. Ibn al-Humam, who died in the year 861 after Hijrah. This is an explanation of another book on Usul al-Fiqh, which is known as At-Taqrir wa Tahbir, which was written by Abu Abdullah Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Muhammad al-Ma'ruf bi Ibn Amir al-Hajj al-Hanafi, who died in the year 879. So we have two books. We have At-Taqrir wa Tahbir of Ibn Amir al-Hajj al-Hanafi, and we have At-Tahrir fi Usul al-Fiqh, which is the explanation of this book by Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi. Now, so you can correct this in your English editions of these two books. Is it clear for what I have said so far? The students with me, or are they following me? Because I can't see nothing, I can't see no messages. So I hope I'm not talking to a brick wall. Now, so these books, you need to learn the name of these books when you have discussions on these issues. You will need to know about these books. So I mentioned three books so far. I mentioned Al-Hidayah, and I mentioned that Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi wrote an explanation to Al-Hidayah called Fathul Qadir. Fathul Qadir, many books have been illustrated. Ash-Shawkani wrote a tafsir called Fathul Qadir. So don't get the similar names mixed up. Then we have two books on Usul al-Fiqh of the Hanafi Madhhab. One by Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi, which is an explanation of another book on Usul al-Fiqh. So Ibn al-Humam's book is called At-Tahrir fi Usul al-Fiqh. And Ibn Amir al-Hajj al-Hanafi, his book is called At-Taqrir wa Tahbir with regards to the issue of Usul al-Fiqh. So now we'll read the statement of what Ibn Humam says. He says that to follow any specific madhab is not regarded by any source, and nobody has given argument in its favor. To make iltizam of madhab mu'ayyan, he says that nobody has favored this position. He says only those things, any that Allah and His messengers have made obligatory, are worth following. So something can only be ordained upon you, or something can only be made obligatory upon you if it was obligated by Allah and Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is obvious that Allah and His Messenger have not made it obligatory to follow any person in religious matters. Blindly follow. Meaning, whenever the word follow has been used in this book, the translator, sometimes he says follow, sometimes he says blindly follow. That which he is blindly follow, because the issue that is being discussed here is at-taqlid. And if you look at it from a rational point, from a rational point of view, then if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam to be followed, then how can we obligate or say that it is obligatory upon us to follow somebody other than who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected as His messenger? This rhetoric doesn't fit in any place. If somebody was to argue and say, well, we don't actually follow this, we don't actually intend to blindly follow this person. Through the blind following of this person, we follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This might be an argument that somebody may present. We say that this concept of wasila, taking an intermediary between Allah and ourselves, when it comes to at-tawheed, these people have intermediaries. When it comes to following Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they want to have intermediaries. So the whole deen revolves around intermediaries. Whereas we say that it is obligatory upon the Muslim to follow Allah and Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anything other than that has been based upon speculative arguments, and there is no evidence for this, not in the Quran and not in the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Ibn al-Humam al-Hanafi has pointed out to us. And he says the golden era, al-Qurun al-Mufaddalah, we find that in the golden era of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his companions and their followers passed, but no one made it compulsory to follow a specific madhab or person. We didn't find in the time of the Salaf, or the first three generations, the formative Islamic period, as it is called, that we find that anybody from amongst that time made a claim that you can only follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through an intermediary, meaning that you have to blindly follow in order to follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because this is the crux of the argument. The crux of the argument is that if you want to ask from Allah, you need an intermediary. If you want to turn to Allah, you need an intermediary. If you want to follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and be obedient to him, you need an intermediary. You have to blindly so-and-so, or you have to blindly follow so-and-so in order to follow Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is their rhetoric. And this rhetoric in itself, if you contemplate over it, it doesn't make sense. This deen is a deen which connects us directly to Allah and Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we are not in need of any intermediaries like the Catholics and the Christians and the Jews. Many blind followers have been heard saying, so you find many of these blind followers, they say, I am a Hanafi or I am a Shafi, and the fact is quite different from their verbal utterances. So a lot of these fanatics, they say that we are Hanafi and we are Shafi'i, and the fact is quite different from their verbal. They just claim to be Hanafi or Shafi. They are quite ignorant of the teachings of the Imams. So if they were truly, you can say, if they were truly adherents or loyal people towards the Imams that they have taken as the Imams, if they would have listened to what the Imams said, then they would have abandoned their statements and followed the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If anyone claims to be a jurist or a writer, he has to prove it. If somebody says that I am a faqih or that I am a katib, then he cannot just make that claim without proving his argument. Otherwise, his claim of being a jurist or writer is false. Otherwise, everybody can make a claim that I am this and I am that. Nobody can prove it. The same is the case of being a Hanafi or a Shafi. If they do not understand the teachings of the Imam and have no regard for their sayings, how can they be what they claim to be? If they don't follow what the Imam said, then how can they claim to be what they are be? So this is what Ibn Humam al-Hanafi mentioned in At-Tahrir fi Usul al-Fiqh. We have another scholar, and al-Fullani, in his book Iqadu Himam Uli al-Absar, he mentions, al-Fullani mentions in his book, he says that there is a difference between a blind follower and a follower of evidence. So al-ittiba, which has been mentioned in the Quran many times, refers to a person who follows evidence. So if you are to follow evidence here is referring to the Quran and the Sunnah. Evidence which is based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah. If you follow this, then you are known as, then this is known as ittiba, and the person who does so is known as a muttabi. And the one who does not follow evidence and just follows opinions blindly, then this person is known as a muqaddid. So Al-Fullani makes a difference. He says a blind follower never inquires about the orders of Allah and His Prophet. Now, the Shaykh rahimahullah al-Fulani is making a distinction between a muqallid and a muttabi. How do you make a difference between what are the main differences between a muqallid and a muttabi? He says that the first difference which should be noted is that the muqallid or the blind follower, he never asks what did Allah and Allah's Messenger say. He always asks what is the opinion of his imam, or what does his madhab say. For example, he will say, what does the Hanafi madhab say? This is the highlighting difference between a muttabi and a muqallid. And you've seen this. You will see that somebody who might be speaking and he'll say that this is what we should say, that the Prophet said this, and he will say, yeah, but what does the Hanafi madhab say? What does the Hanbali madhab say? So the words of the Prophet ﷺ in reality will have no impact and will draw no attention of this person, because it will be deaf ears on him. What he is concerned about is what does his madhab say. And he says, this is what you find. You find that muttabi, he is only concerned about what Allah and Allah's Messenger says. With regards to the muqallid, then he is concerned about what his madhab and what his imam says. And then he says, he's always interested to discern the views of his imam. Even if he finds that the view of his imam, the views of his imam are contrary to the Quran and Sunnah, he sticks to them. So if he was to find that the view of his imam or the view of his madhab goes against what Allah and Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have said, it doesn't bother him. So this is the start of fanatism and to be bigoted, ta'assub, where he abandons the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is the start of kufr, of rejecting what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said without any. There is no justification. There is no out of context. It's clear that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said something and it is established and it is agreed upon, then to oppose that is basically directing yourself to the hellfire. So this is what the Shaykh, he says, however, the follower of evidence is not primarily interested to know the point of view of a particular imam. The person who is a muttabi, he's not concerned, and he does not know the opinions of any of the imams. All he will know, that which is obligatory upon him to know, and that is to know what the Prophet ﷺ said or did or approved. That's what he will know. But his query is more towards the understanding of the orders of Allah and the Prophet ﷺ. So his queries will always be that he is interested in finding out and researching and knowing what are the orders of Allah, what's the hukm of Allah and Allah's Messenger. A follower of evidence reaps benefits from all fields. A follower of evidence reaps benefit from all fields. Another comparison, whereas a blind follower sticks to one. So a person who may follow the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it might be said to him, well, you know what, this is the opinion of so-and-so imam as well, and so-and-so imam as well, and so-and-so imam as well. So he may even know about the other opinions of other scholars, which are confirmed to be correct when they are judged on the scales of the Sunnah. So he will know of this, whereas the muqallid will only know about the imam who he blindly follows. So this is the principal difference between the followers of the later period and former righteous believers. So we find that in the golden era, the norm of the Muslims was to go to a scholar who gives a fatwa based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah, and it is to adhere to this fatwa, knowing the possibility that the Shaykh or the Mufti may be wrong. And then if it becomes clear that the Shaykh and the Mufti may have made a mistake, then the simple solution to that is to adopt the position or the opinion which is in accordance to the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we find that the Shaykh also mentioned that the methodology of the muttabi' was that if he had an issue which was a contemporary issue of some nature, we have, that he would go and ask any scholar who would be able to give him an answer based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah. So he's not obliged that he just goes by one single opinion or one single scholar, and he doesn't listen to any other scholar, or he becomes fanatic towards the first scholar and he's always defending the opinions of this scholar, to the extent that if he finds evidence contrary to the Kitab and the Sunnah, he doesn't pay attention to it. So this is what we find, that we find these type of people present today in our communities, and they are very problematic. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us safety and grant us firmness upon the Sunnah of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Then the Shaykh moved now on to what is the meaning of at-taqleed in the Sharia. Taqleed, as we all know, in the Arabic language means a leash which is tied around an animal. It comes from qalada, and the leash that you tie around a dog, and the dog follows you, and then the dog is the muqallid of his master. So this is what taqleed means. It means that you just follow whoever is in front of you. So we find that nowhere in the Quran or in the Sunnah is the word taqleed has been used. Nowhere in the Quran or in the Sunnah that you have to make taqleed. You have to blindly follow, and you have to blindly accept. But we don't find this anywhere in the Quran and Sunnah. We find that if the word has been mentioned, then it's been mentioned in its linguistic sense in Surah Al-Ma'idah, وَلَا الْقَلَائِدَ وَلَا آمِينَ الْبَيْتِ الْحَرَامِ يَبْتَغُونَ فَضْلًا مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ وَرِضْوَانًا. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the animals that have been taken to be slaughtered. Now, taqleed, its meaning in the Shar, or it's Islamically, taqleed means, as the Shaykh he says الرجوع إلى قول لا حجة لقائله عليه. It is to return back to an opinion or a statement where there is no proof of evidence based upon the statement that is being adopted. So basically, following the position of another person without knowing its evidence, in simple words. This is the meaning of التقرير. And he says, وَالْإِتِّبَاء مَا ثَبَتَ عَلَيْهِ حُجَّةً. And ittiba is that which is. So he says here, in Sharia, the meaning of taqleed, blind following, is to follow and refer to a saying or a point of view which the convinced, meaning the follower, has no argument to prove correct. Basically, he doesn't know its evidence. Such following is absolutely forbidden in the Sharia. So taqleed, this type of taqleed is, or taqleed, this concept of taqleed is something which has no argument to prove, which is, is forbidden in the by the Sharia. There's no argument to prove that this is something that can be found in the Kitab and the Sunnah. To follow an issue which is proved by Sharia and lawful arguments is called ittiba. To follow a position which is based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah is ittiba, compliance. And this is a point that I always wanted to make, because there's a lot of confusion amongst the brothers and sisters who say that if a layman or a person who is a jahil was to go back to a mufti or was to go back to a person of knowledge, and he was to ask the person of knowledge a question, that is this permissible to do, is this halal or haram? And if the shaykh or the scholar or the mufti gave a judgment or gave a verdict saying that this is permissible or this is not permissible, and that's what he said, then would this be considered to be blind following? The answer to this is no. If you go back and read al-Ma'sumi al-Khujandi's words carefully, that if a verdict or a position is based upon evidence which has been derived or which has been based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah, then this is not considered to be taqleed. This is considered to be ittiba. So if a mufti gives you a fatwa and this mufti is known to only give a judgment based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah, then this will not be called taqleed. This will be called ittiba, because his judgment is based upon ittiba. Do we understand the difference? Because this question gets asked so many times. So, for example, if you had Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz rahmatullah alayhi, or Shaykh Albani rahmatullah alayhi, or Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, the three sheikhs of our time who were known to give their fatwa based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah. The inference was based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah. The istinbatat or istidlalat were based upon the Kitab and the Sunnah. Hypothetically, a person who may give a verdict, a mufti who may give a verdict, may get it wrong. He may base his judgment by misunderstanding the hadith or knowing a hadith to be weak. Many reasons can be given. But the crux of the issue is that when you take your fatwa from him, he is giving you his fatwa based upon an inference or based upon text or a principle which can be found in the Kitab and the Sunnah. So this is not considered to be blind following. Theoretically, this cannot be considered to be blind following, because now if you go to a mufti who gives a fatwa based upon a madhhab, then this individual is definitely blindly following. So, with regards to going for fatwa, then you should go to only those scholars who are qualified and who understand the issues of fatwa, especially the nawazil, which are the contemporary issues, the conflicts that we have here now, and many of you know what is going on social media. I don't need to speak about these issues. But I remember when I studied the usul of ifta, when I studied the principles of fatawa with some of the shuyukh, when we went through some of the books, our Shaykh Mufti Muhammad al-Istadwi rahmatullah alayhi would always say that do not hasten to give fatwa. And he used to always say, at-taqwa qabla al-fatwa. And he used to always say that do not give fatwa on an-nikah and at-talaq until both parties are present. And both parties assign a single document. And based upon that document, whatever is on that document, a fatwa will be decreed for them. But with regards to certain people who don't understand the concept of certain things, and they speak about certain issues, and they give fatwa on certain issues, so not everybody is able to give fatwa. We find that a lot of the times when a lot of the fatwa are given, we find that many of those who give fatwa, they mix up the usul, they mix up the usul with the furu', they mix up a lot of things. So fatwa is a big responsibility, and as you can remember, that about 1 or 2 years back, somebody gave a verdict that when COVID was happening, that certain people who are working in the NHS, which is the National Health Service of the UK, which is called NHS, for those of you who are not from the UK, those who are working in the COVID lockdown, then they don't have to fast. And this fatwa was batil. So I was requested by Shaykh Abbas and some other scholars when this fatwa was brought to my attention, I contacted the people of knowledge and said to them that we need a fatwa from you. Then they put the burden and the responsibility upon my shoulders to write something and to go through this issue, being from the UK. And then I wrote something, and the contents of what I wrote was concurred and affirmed by the people of knowledge. And then the fatwa was released to show that this fatwa is batil. The one who gives a blanket fatwa just like that, then his fatwa is not to be accepted. So with regards to going back to the people of knowledge and those who are qualified, and if they give you a detailed answer with evidence, then this is also called ittiba. If they give you a very brief answer and say to you, na'am yajuz la yajuz, is permissible, not permissible, then this is also called ittiba. A person, a mustafti, is not mukallaf to know every single detail or every single dalil evidence in great detail. That which is important is that the fatwa is based upon clear, explicit, authentic, credible evidence derived from the Kitab and the Sunnah without any traces of bigoted partisanship or any form of ta'assub. Is that clear? Well, so far, what has been mentioned and what the Shaykh mentioned. I hope that this issue has become clear to you. So he says to follow an issue, then it says in the Sharia, to follow an issue which is proved by Sharia. In Islam, following in the former sense is not allowed, and the latter sense, to which we call compliance, is obligatory. It is allowed in some cases, obligatory for an illiterate and uneducated person to follow the verdict of an Islamic jurist, in spite of the probability of error. So again, like we said, that the fatwa of an alim, it may be, sometimes he may make an error because nobody is free from error. This happened during the time of the companions, and if somebody made an error and the evidence comes to you, then you are not obligated to accept the error and be obliged to follow the error, but it is obligatory upon you to follow the evidence which has been presented to you. And an educated person to follow the verdict of an Islamic jurist in spite of the problem. If this is true, then what now? So what basically the Shaykh is saying here, English is quite poor here. So what the Shaykh is now, the Shaykh is bringing an argument, a argument based upon the usul. So what the Shaykh is saying to the blind followers, listen to this argument. He's saying, if it is permissible for the muqallid, for the blind follower, to follow the fatwa of his mufti without knowing its evidence, with the probability of it being wrong, who is alive and who this scholar is, who is telling them, is my voice clear? Somebody sent me a message and he said that they can't hear me. Abu Luqman, the admin, is my voice clear? Now, so this is the argument. Let's look at the argument. The argument is, so let's throw the spanner back into the side of the muqallids. the blind followers. The muqallida, the blind followers, they say that it is obligatory upon the blind follower to take the fatwa of a mufti without knowing its evidence. Yes or no? This is what they say. They say it's obligatory. You have no choice. You have to take his fatwa. So the Shaykh is saying that if with the probability, while they acknowledge the probability that there is a high probability that the mufti may be wrong, if that is the case, that it is still permissible for them and still obligatory upon them to follow, then why would it not be permissible to follow the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? If it's obligatory to follow the saying of a man with the probability of it being a mistake, then why do you say it's not permissible to follow the sunnah or the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? If it is the case that it is not, that the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, if the accuracy and the authority of the hadith is proved, then it is obligatory to act upon it, and it is not correct to make lame excuses and to put conditions that if such and such a person acts upon it, then the hadith will be accepted. So the authenticity most here at the university. Can everybody listen to me? So the argument is that if it is obligatory upon you to follow the saying of a man, and with knowing that there is a probability that he may be mistaken, why is it not permissible for you to follow the sunnah or the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after its authenticity has been established? Why is it that you have to put a clause of saying that on it? Why do you put this clause of this condition that so and so needs to act upon it? He said, for those who do so, then this is from Abdul al-Batil. It is from the most batil things that one can think of. And he said, accepting the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ conditionally is also totally wrong. You cannot conditionally accept the Prophet ﷺ's hadith. You have to absolutely accept the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Allah has made the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ the criterion for Muslims to lead their lives. You have to lead a life in accordance to the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ, and the criteria, the miyar is to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ. He who understands the meaning and sense of hadith should act upon it and may pass a verdict. Those who cannot understand the meaning of the Quran and hadith, it is their duty to ask about it from those who know it. Allah the Almighty says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Famous ayah that you know. So ask the people of reminder, Ahlul Dhikr, the people of the book, as it is referring to. If you do not know, this is an ayah which is always used to promote and to propagate the concept that you need to follow ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. Although some observations have been made by certain scholars that can this Quranic ayah be used to justify blind following, as many try to use this ayah to justify blind following. They say, look, it says, ask the people of knowledge if you do not know, or ask the people of dhikr if they do not know. If you do not know, then Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah in his Fatawa Nadhiriyah has refuted that this ayah cannot be used in defense of taqleed. Rather, it is an ayah which refutes taqleed, because the following ayah, which in kuntum la ta'lamun, after it is bil bayyinati waz zubur. The bayyinat is clear evidence. So he says, so the people of those who do not know and those who do not have knowledge, then that which is obligatory upon them is to refer back to the people of knowledge. This is a qaida kulliyya thabita muttarida, and there is la khilafa bayna ahli al-ilm fi hadha, that they need to go back to the people of knowledge. The people of knowledge who give fatwa based upon the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If someone asks about an issue from a mufti or from his shaykh and relies on it, then he should also believe and have trust in hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you can trust your shaykh and your mufti and your imam, then why can't you trust the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which have been collected by reliable authorities? Pretending not to grasp the meaning of hadith is just the same as not comprehending the meaning of the verdict of the jurist. So this argument that you have, they say, oh, how dare you read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You cannot read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You are not qualified to read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You are not qualified to read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You need so much knowledge. You need to study 25 subjects to read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All these rhetoric that the people come out with. The Shaykh again refutes them with their own principle. He said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My apologies for having a weak connection at the university. We have a weak connection on this side of the building. So the Shaykh rahimahullah, he said that if it is okay for you to understand the words of ordinary men, And why can't you understand the words of the Prophet ﷺ, who was gifted with the miracle of Jawami ul-Kalim, elucidation of speech? That the words of the Prophet ﷺ are the easiest words to understand. So why is it that the words of a man, which are difficult to understand, are to be read and understood and are easily comprehended? But the words of Rasulullah ﷺ are not easily read, not easily understood or comprehended. This in itself is a denial of the miracle of Rasulullah ﷺ, which is Jawami al-Kalim, not in its absolute sense, but partially. So we say that now not everything can be understood. No doubt that we are not saying that you be independent from the people of knowledge. The people of knowledge, to refer back to them, is a must. But to put the clause that you can't read the words of the Prophet ﷺ and then confirm your understanding and go back to the people of knowledge, but you can read the words of ordinary men, then this is something which is totally unacceptable. So he says the same is the case with hadith. If there is any difficulty in understanding the meaning, any scholar may be asked to explain it. It is obvious that hadith is a stronger and better proof than qiyas, analogy. So you people who always do analogies, you're known as Ahlul Rai, Ahlul Qiyas, then an ijtihad, authoritative interpretation of Islamic law, then what would you have to say with regards to the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And this is what has been said with regards to following and not reading the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We've had statements where scholars say that if you read hadith, you will be led astray, you'll become misguided. But if you read the words of men, you will be guided. That's the opposite, mafhum al-mukhalafa. If I said to you, don't read the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but read the words of the scholars, that means if you read the words of the scholars, you'll be guided. But if you read the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you'll be misguided. This is again borderline kufr. Is it clear so far of what has been mentioned before we move on? Well, do we understand the argument of how we turn the argument? This is known as qalbul adillah. That when they ask us, are you qualified to read hadith? So we say to them, are you qualified to understand the verdicts of your muftis who you blindly follow? If it is okay for you to blindly follow them, then why is it not okay for us to follow the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after we have verified it with the scholars? Then the Shaykh rahimahullah, he mentioned Ibn Nujaym, who as he says, again Ibn Nujaym was another scholar who was an Egyptian scholar, Zainuddin ibn Ibrāhīm ibn Muhammad, famously known as Ibn Nujaym al-Misri, who died in the year 970 after Hijrah. Ibn Nujaym has a book on Hanafi fiqh, which I studied when I was studying, known as al-Ra'iq, another module of the Hanafi fiqh. He says something. He said, acting upon plain and categorical text of a hadith is far better than acting upon qiyas, analogy. This is what he said. He says, so this is, we know that the Hanafi fiqh, one of the main usul that they have, asal that they have from the usul, is analogy, qiyas. They give a lot of importance to qiyas. They reject many narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam due to rationality, due to them not conforming with qiyas, with analogy. But he says that to follow hadith, again opposing his madhhab, he says this. He says, acting upon a hadith is obligatory, and it is not obligatory to act according to qiyas. All Imams agree upon and advise every learned person to act upon the plain meaning of hadith. So this is what he says. He says that every single scholar has said that you must try to act upon hadith which is sahih from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says that which is walhasil, he says that to act upon the hadith in accordance to that which becomes clear to a person whose understanding is sound, is from the maslihah diniyya, is from the benefits or from the required good results of this deen. And this is the madhhab which is accepted by all that follow the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is for this reason we find that Abu Hanifa, he says, he used to give fatwa, he used to say, and we have given this fatwa based upon the knowledge that we possess. If anybody finds anything that is more clear to what we have said, فَهُوَ أَوْلَى بِالصَّوَابِ, then that is better to be followed, and that is better to be adopted, and that is better to be more close to the truth. The Shaykh mentioned this, although the translator did not translate this. Then he mentioned something from Sha'rani in Tanbih al-Mughtarrin by Abdul Wahhab ibn Ahmad ibn Ali al-Hanafi al-Sha'rani, who died in the year 973, who brings a quote from another Hanafi scholar who says, Ali Qari al-Hanafi. Mullah Ali Qari al-Hanafi was a famous Qari of the Quran and a famous scholar from the Hanafi Madhhab. He has written many books explaining the Hanafi Madhhab. He says, this is the best of mine, if any. Okay, so basically the translator has got this mixed up. The statement of what he says is of Tanbihul Muqtarrin of Abu Hanifa, then this is not correct. The Tanbihul Muqtarrin. Naam. One second, I'm just looking at the English. طيب نعم الصحيح. So in Tanbih al-Muqtarrin, this statement of Abu Hanifa has been mentioned, which I just mentioned now, that this is the best of mine. If anyone finds anything more clear and understandable than this, then it would be better for him to act upon that. Now, so this statement, which I mentioned of Abu Hanifa, has been mentioned in Tanbih al-Muqtarrin by Abdul Wahhab ibn Ahmad ibn Ali al-Hanafi al-Sha'rani. Now, then we finish today with the statement of Mullah Ali Qari, and we'll finish this chapter, and then next chapter will be that the Imam which should be followed should be Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ali Qari al-Hanafi, he says, and this is something which has been, he says, Mullah Ali Qari also holds up the same idea and says that in any individual of the Muslim Ummah need not be a Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki or Hanbali. And every individual, if he himself is not a learned person, should ask for an explanation and have the interpretation of an issue concerned from a scholar. He can also seek verdicts of the Imams about the issue and views of the one who is more clearly in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah. Hence the well-known saying, he who follows a scholar meets Allah safe and sound, but it is obligatory for every Muslim to follow the Prophet. So this is a beautiful qa'idah. He said, "Man tabi'a 'aliman laqiya Allahu saliman, wa kullu mukallafin ma'mur, wa kullu mukallafin ma'murun bi ittiba'i sayyidil anbiya, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam." So, as Ali Qari al-Hanafi has mentioned here clearly, that Allah did not make it obligatory upon this ummah that somebody be a Maliki, Shafi and a Hanbali. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it obligatory for the one, upon every single person who's not a scholar, is to ask the people of knowledge. And this is what we call true. And the four Imams are from the people of knowledge, as he mentions here. That's why it is said, "Man tabi'a 'aliman laqiya Allahu saliman." Some people thought that this is a hadith, but this is not a hadith. Rather, it is to ascribe this statement to the Prophet ﷺ is a fabrication, as Shaykh Al-Albani rahimahullah has pointed out in Silsilatul Ahadith al-Dha'ifa. But the statement in itself, not ascribed to the Prophet ﷺ, is okay to use. مَنْ تَبِعَ عَالِمًا لَقِيَ اللَّهُ سَالِمًا وَكُلُّ مُكَلَّفٍ مَأْمُورٌ بِاتِّبَاعِ سَيِّدِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ سَيِّدِنَا مُحَمَّدٍ صلى الله عليه وسلم. And by this, alhamdulillah, we have finished this chapter. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, inshallah, next week, we shall move on to the next chapter now. If there's any questions, we may ask quickly before we pack up now.
No. Shaykh, sister asked, Ahsan Allah alaykum Shaykhana, by quote unquote uneducated people, as was translated, does the Shaykh rahimahullah mean those people who are uneducated in the deen?
No, just like amatun nas. Sometimes translations are not good. This is not a defaming statement, but it's just the people who are amatun nas, or maybe those who have not, who do not seek knowledge, just normal working class people. No. Further.
I can only see one more question currently, but it's not terribly related. But a sister asks, how important is it to seek knowledge for women?
It's obligatory upon a woman to learn everything that which concerns herself. So everything that which every single woman is obligated to seek knowledge, which will be sufficient for her in her ibadah, and which will be sufficient for her in her mu'amalat. No. Say ويجب على المكلف أن يتعلم في دينه ما يكفيه في عباداته ومعاملاته. No, that's what the usuliyun say. No. Now, any more questions? Hi, Abu Luqman.
No more questions, Shaykh. Oh, no, one more. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. If a muqallid said that he cannot practice what is in the Quran and Sunnah directly because he cannot do a amal according to the Sunnah, what should be prescribed to him?
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated for him to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. If he's not going to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, then what is he going to follow? He must follow the Quran and the Sunnah. If he's a Roman layman, then he must go back to the people of knowledge who will direct him to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, or without blindly following them. No. Class, we'll stop here. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khairah. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Inshallah, we'll meet you tomorrow for al-Manzumatul Bayquniyya.